Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Pranamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachayana Om Jnanatmyanasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Jagvipatamaham Vande
Mahatma Prabhu ki
Jai. Prabhupada Jai. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. Hare Krishna. So Rati Manjari had a topic. But could you feed me the topic? Like, kind of like ask me questions and keep me on track?
Oh, yes. I suggested the building of community, Devotional Community. And I was thinking, I don't know if you like that, but there is this book I got from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. It's Bhakti Tirtha Swami commenting on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati on the 64 principles of building community. Would you like to, I hope I can find it, but if I just can find it, would you like to draw from that, or you just like to do dialogue?
Or you can feed me.
Yeah, let me see if it is available.
Well, I have some experience with community. Good ones and bad ones. And the best community I've seen, well, maybe this is subjective.
Well, it's not there, so it's all private number.
I'll tell you my experiences. I think it's interesting. Many places in ISKCON, we're trying to build communities. And it differs from country to country because cultures are different. And how we view community will differ from country to country. Or differ even from family to family, depending on how you're raised. So I visited Israel about 3 times. And as you may know, Israel has a history of communes called, what are they called? Kibbutz. And so that's within the blood and the culture of the community, of the Israeli people. It's in their blood, community. So when I was in Israel, I was staying in a devotee community. And it was unlike any other community that I've ever been in. And I could see, because they had community in their blood, it was natural. And I've also had the opposite experience. Devotees trying to form community were extremely independent, on the verge of revolutionary. And they had a very difficult time forming community because they were too, it wasn't part of their culture, or it wasn't part of their nature. So, whenever you're trying to create something external without changing it internally, it doesn't happen. So, if we have the rules or the laws or the principles for community, it has to be something internalized. Because if it isn't, it won't work. So that's something I've seen. A lot of times devotees speak about community because we realize that we should stay together for association. But then sometimes it doesn't work. We don't get along. You have your idea, I have my idea. And, maybe 100 or so years ago, families and villages were little communities. But I think one of the differences, at least what I've seen in building community, there's an authority structure, and people accept it. So like the elders. Like if you look at any traditional community, they have what are called the elders, and everybody respects them. And that's how it works. And it's, you might say it's not so democratic, but at least what I've seen, less democratic created better communities. And you would think it would be the opposite. But when it gets too democratic, I've been in communities where people just couldn't agree.
Elders or seniors? Elders or seniors?
Well, in America they call them elders. Oh, that's how they refer. Same thing. I think seniors, the word seniors in America means you're ready to die.
All right.
Seniors means you're retired or almost dead. Elders is more respectful. It's like your wisdom, you're older. Wisdom.
Not referring to senior devotees.
No, just general communities. Well, you could refer to senior devotees as elders, but just general communities that I've seen that did the best, there was respect for the elders. And of course the elders had to be qualified. There's another aspect of community for us as devotees is that we have to be practicing Krishna consciousness to some degree. At least there have to be enough of us that are practicing principles to keep that standard. In traditional communities in India, the Brahmins live together. Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, they all live together. That's what the communities work. You could call it apartheid, but it worked because people of the same nature lived together and they were happy. And as you know, in Vedic times, things were governed by Brahmins. So people listened to the Brahmins. So that made it work. And so now let's take a look at community from the inside out.
Something's burning.
Some
Somebody
rice
able
is
to
on
check
fire.
that?
As long as it's not Tony, we're okay.
No, it's alright.
Oh
Barbecued rice?
It's the first time they're trying out this.
Oh,
We're gonna get the experiment.
fried rice, not burnt, fried. It's all in the name. If you just change the name, it'll taste good. Do you know that? If I give you water from a sink in a silver glass and I give it a French name, it'll taste much better than the bottled water, the purified water. Did you know that? When Prabhupada was here, there was a constant theme, I would say, of devotees having difficulty getting along. And Prabhupada got frustrated at one point. And he said, after my spiritual master left, the disciples didn't get along. But they got along when I was alive. But I'm alive and you're not even getting along. So he expressed his frustration. And he saw that we had that nature, very independent, anti-authority. And it makes it difficult. And so often what Prabhupada had to do is, when he was trying to get people to work together, sometimes they couldn't, so he had to just give them their own domain. So, okay, you go here. This is how they got along. We get along fine. How? We live in different cities. That's how we get along. I get along fine with my wife. We live in different continents. Something like that. So he had to do that just because they couldn't get along. So that was unfortunate. And I think it's good to address this topic by looking at it from our own perspective of how we could contribute to community or not, or upset it. There's a nice letter in the temple in Amsterdam about setting the example rather than criticizing. So that was something that Prabhupada taught. If everybody sets a good example, things will be better. And there were instances where you could see that Prabhupada was really concerned that we weren't getting along, like extremely concerned. Concerned to the point in which he felt that the movement wouldn't have a future if we didn't learn how to get along. Because he understood that the cooperation of his disciples was you could say the power or the glue, the means, the principle by which Krishna consciousness would spread. And he expressed his fear that if we didn't get along, it would upset the balance and the movement could just dissolve itself from within. And even in the early days, Prabhupada said it could only dissolve from within, not from without. And so he expressed that more specifically in terms of our inability to work together. If you can't work together, then I can't work through you. Because you'll put your energy this way against one another instead of out to the world. So it was something very important for Prabhupada. It was a message that was given many times, and we could see it was important. And still, it's so important, we still had trouble getting along. We still do, to this day. And I think I can just tell you my personal feeling. It's said that the way you glorify someone is you follow their teachings or you live their teachings. That's the best glorification. So, we talk about love of Prabhupada and service to Prabhupada. I think this is one of the best ways to do it. By, working together because that pleases Prabhupada. And so sometimes we might talk about love for Prabhupada, but not do what he loves. So we have to be aware of that. Because it could be a very shallow love. And so this was important to him. And we were talking about this on Sunday, that many of us went through very difficult times within the movement. Things didn't always go right, and people were not always treated well. And many of us would have to battle with the desire to leave, because we sometimes felt that people weren't being treated fairly, or we weren't being treated fairly. Things were unjust. Things were going on that shouldn't be allowed to go on. People who were pure were getting minimized. People who are not pure were getting elevated. It was difficult. And but we knew Prabhupada wanted us to work within the institution. So there was one interesting event that happened where one of the leaders, he deviated a lot when he was the president of the temple. And I don't want to tell you what he did, but it was like major deviation on a daily basis. And so the devotees were confused. Well, he's the president, Prabhupada said, we should cooperate. So should we cooperate or not? Because he's breaking principles of Krishna consciousness on a daily basis. And we're supposed to follow him. So they asked Prabhupada, because some devotees left, some devotees protested, and some devotees stayed and just cooperated to keep the temple together. So if you had a quiz, and I said, if the leader's breaking the principles, what of the three things should you do? Protest it, take it to the leadership, cooperate, or leave?
Probably not be in Holland.
Protest? Protest?
No, cooperate.
Cooperation.
Protest.
That would be a lack of integrity. So, anyway, after the whole incident cleared, they asked Prabhupada, what should we have done? And he said something interesting. He said, you shouldn't have left the temple because you were needed to maintain it. So if you leave, so for the fault of one person, you leave Krishna.
Yeah.
He said, but the leaders shouldn't have tolerated it and should have brought it up and stopped it. So basically you should be doing both things. You should be working together to keep the temple, cooperating, but then, I don't want to say protesting, but dealing with it. And so eventually they did, and then he was removed. Yeah, so Prabhupada agreed that was the right thing, to do both. Isn't that interesting?
Speaking about New Vrindavan now?
No, this is New York. Because generally you would think they're mutually exclusive. You do one or the other, not both. One seems opposite of the other. But he approved of both. So there are other instances in which, similar instances, not where leaders were breaking principles, but leaders were not dealing well with devotees and complaints came to Prabhupada. And he more or less gave the same instructions that, I've told so-and-so to deal with it, but for the time being cooperate. So the person wasn't breaking any principles. But cooperate for the time being, keep everything together. So that was one standard Prabhupada had. Keep it together while you're trying to solve it. It's like you have a problem with your husband or wife. Stay together while you solve it. Don't just drop everything. So, now the problem that I think we have to confront or accept and acknowledge is that Prabhupada wanted us to set an example. Like one time, United Nations of the spiritual world, set an example. So if we don't get along well, we don't set a good example, and it will make people question the validity of Krishna consciousness. Like, you say it's a high philosophy, okay, but why doesn't it work? So that's the problem. And my personal experience is that in the long run, you can't successfully establish a religious movement that doesn't follow what it teaches. You can get new people, and the old people go, and get more new people go. You can do that for a while, but you can't do that forever. Or, if that's what you do, you don't actually have the movement that Prabhupada started. You just have a shadow of it. So that thought has always weighed heavy on me, and it's always inspired me. We are meant to be examples of what Prabhupada taught. And he wanted us to be examples for the world of how we can all live in God consciousness peacefully together. And sometimes Prabhupada would say, we have disciples from Russia, from India, from America, from Europe, from Africa, they all come together, they all get along. So you could say, by Prabhupada saying that, it was also an instruction that we should get along. So that's a huge, huge challenge, I think. Maybe one of the most difficult. And some of my godbrothers have feel that of all the austerities in Krishna consciousness, that's probably the biggest one. Getting up early is not the biggest one. No illicit sex is not the biggest one. Getting along is the biggest. That's the biggest austerity. You agree?
Yes.
It's the most difficult. Yeah. It's the most difficult, but it's the most needed. So, it's my experience, of devotees wanting to create community, but they don't have community inside. They're too independent. They don't know how to get along, and they can't create it, even though they have the facility, the buildings, the property, everything. It doesn't work. And it requires maturity, it requires sensitive leadership, it requires people who aren't judgmental, they're more accepting, all these things. It requires a pretty high level of Krishna consciousness. And sometimes we may not have that. And you can't build community from a low level, I don't think. The other problem we have, which other older communities don't have, is they have a history. And so they've built communities and developed over centuries. And we're all just different people from different cultures thrown together in one room with no experience of community or very little. So that's a huge challenge, isn't it? You don't come from a communal background and you're going to live in a community. It can be really hard. Like for myself, when I was young, what I remember about my life is when my parents had absolutely no control over me. And they didn't even try because they knew they couldn't. So nobody told me what to do. I did whatever I want, as I pleased, whenever I wanted. So now, having been raised that way and having cultivated that mentality, coming into a community and being subservient to the elders and doing whatever they say even when I disagree, that's like a huge challenge. And I'm sure many or most of the devotees from Europe and America, that's how they grew up. And if they did grow up that way, by the time they're 18, they were out of home doing anything they wanted. Isn't it? So, so when we talk about community, we have to look at ourselves. So, can I adapt to what's necessary? And, for the higher cause, maybe I give up some independence, maybe I have to compromise, but the higher cause is now we have community. And community can be the most powerful way to bring people to Krishna consciousness. Because people want community. One realization I had several years ago, very, very strong. Krishna was really, really pushing this. And Krishna was telling me that the most effective way to spread Krishna consciousness is within our community. I'm not talking about farm communities, but within whatever community we have, to establish a culture where there's a high degree of respect, a high degree of service, a low degree of judgment, a lot of vulnerability, openness, and genuineness, where nobody's fake. And then if people come into that community, they'll just see that and they'll say, I've never seen anything this pristine and this pure, I want to be part of it. The opposite is also true. I think even more so for us, because, maybe you go to some company and things are a little dysfunctional, but they're not preaching purity. It's just a corporation. But we're preaching purity. So the paradox is obvious when we're not that way. Isn't it? Because we're supposed to be.
Did you say vulnerability? A certain moment?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
What it means? To not be pretentious. To be open about your faults and weaknesses and not feel the need to pretend that you're more advanced than you are, because to be accepted by people. In other words, it's a culture. In other words, if I can only be accepted if I behave a certain way, I can't be vulnerable, because once I'm vulnerable, I'll be rejected. So it's a culture. So if we create a culture where we can all be vulnerable and accepted, then I can be vulnerable, you can be vulnerable, we can be very straight and honest, and we'll just accept one another that way and we'll help one another. I'd see if there's a culture like that, I think that culture would just draw people to Krishna consciousness naturally, more than anything. The other The other realization I had is that if people come to Krishna consciousness and their experiences where they work, or an organization that they work, is more together than we are, they'll be disappointed. This one doesn't get along with that one, or this one's bickering behind the back, and they'll say, well, my organization, we have ethics, we have culture, we don't do that, and you're doing it here. Very discouraging. So in order to attract people who have high principles, we have to have high principles. Otherwise, they won't want to be part of it. So Krishna was just telling me this very strongly. That within our organization, we have to have a a culture that's really clearly demarcated. Everybody knows what it is, and everybody's trying to live it. And then it works, right? And I've talked about this before, but one of the interesting things that you find in religious institutions, because we're talking about vulnerability, that a lot of religious institutions, it's hard for people to be vulnerable. because people tend to be judged more than they will outside the religious institution, because the religious institution has higher standards. So we have a tendency to judge one another, and that closes us up, and that causes us to be pretentious. Because I don't want you to judge me, so I'll just fake it like everything's fine, and I'm a pure devotee. Then I won't have any problems with it. But then it creates a culture which is artificial, and then if I have a problem and I can't tell anybody because I'm afraid I'll be judged, then that problem might eat me up. So, or I'm afraid I'll be rejected from the community if I admit my problem. So that's, I just felt that I felt that there's certain people that are meant to be devotees, and Krishna won't let them come to the temples yet until we clean up the culture. And when we clean it up, they'll show up like the next day. Well, I've been looking for this. Well, I've been looking for this for 48 years. Well, why didn't you come 40 years ago? I don't know. But we know why. Because we weren't ready. And we know this person, if they had come last week, they wouldn't have stayed. But now this week, everything's better. And I've seen this many, many, many times. I was just in Poland, and there was a devotee I met, and she had first come to Krishna consciousness 20 years ago, or first met devotees and read Prabhupada's books, but she never went to the temple. And then she started going to the temple like a year ago. And then we're trying to analyze why. And she has very high standards. And we realized that the temple that she would have joined 20 years ago, she wouldn't have been able to stay there. But the temple matured, and now she's ready for it. And I've seen this. But sometimes when we've made changes in temples, people showed up, and I understood. You were meant to show up after we made these changes. It was obvious. They just somehow or other, well, haven't you come to the temple before? I don't know why. I don't know. I've driven by it 4,000 times in the last 20 years. But I just decided to walk in today. Or sometimes it's like, that's the day the visiting sannyasi is coming. And I've seen the opposite also. That sometimes people, they have an inimical, fault-finding nature, and Krishna arranges for them to meet someone who says the wrong thing to them and agitates them. I've seen that many times. It's like this mystical thing. You want to find fault with this guy? Well, you're going to meet a devotee who's going to say something you don't like. And you're going to stamp Pete out of the temple, huffing and puffing. I've seen that. It's like Krishna is fulfilling the desire. So you had some?
Yeah, you were talking about the need for elders or seniors to set a good example, which is this point. And then you were just talking about how it can be helpful within the culture in the community is to be open, that it's all right to admit your own faults and frailties. And so personally, I've been around for decades, but I haven't been pure in following. And so in one sense, people give me respect because I've been around, but I know that I'm not that proper example. So I've tried, as you know, to be open and not to pretend that just because I've been around that I'm really your great leader, which I'm not, but it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, and I do take it that it's Krishna's way to purify me, to make me feel humble. And so I'm trying to walk that road of being open, but I don't want to disturb or discourage others who are just freshly in, and maybe they're like even light years ahead of me. I see that, I think that sometimes, and it might be true. So I'm happy because I can learn from you, But I also want to be an inspiration and be that example, and I can't fake it because it will be fake and it won't help you.
So being honest is actually what it is about. That's what.
Well,
Yeah,
Well,
that's part of it.
I
At
can-
least I can try to be honest.
I can turn it around though, because what you said in a sense is paradoxical. Because by being honest, you're setting an example, a good
I
example.
can set an example in being honest. I don't know how encouraging it will be, but
Well,
at least
okay.
that part, I think it's essential. It's the
I can-
last leg of religion.
I can speak about it. We can discuss it. I don't know if everyone will agree with what I say, but these are feelings that I have, and they're pretty strong. I think that one of the things that may be lacking in our movement is leaders more often admitting their own shortcomings.
Yes, I think so.
Because I think the fact is we all have shortcomings, and if you think I don't have any, it actually makes you, it may make you feel good, but it may make you feel bad also. I could never be like you. The example of Jayananda was loved by everyone, and he was kind of like the personification of admitting his shortcomings. So it was just like, if you talk to Jayananda, you're going to hear from him how, oh Prabhu, I'm so lusty, and I'm so this, and I don't love Prabhupada. You hear all these things, and all of that was genuine, and it would endear you to him, and it would make you more humble, because it may have been true, it may not have been true, but the fact that he said it just would humble you, because most leaders don't say that. He's the oldest devotee in the temple. He's doing like 10 times more service than anybody, and he's talking about all the things that are wrong with him. So I feel that's extremely important, and I feel there's not enough of that. I would like to see more of it. In Mayapur, there was a tirtha with Radha Swami, and his leading men were in charge of the kitchen. They weren't even at the program. They were cooking and cleaning the pots. And I think it's such a good example that somebody that doesn't have to do that would do it. Because it kind of says, okay, when you've been a devotee 40 years and you're the temple president, you will also get to clean the pots. It's usually the opposite. So I think that's healthy. I think we could use more of that. And I've heard spiritual teachers outside of ISKCON speak, and they were relating their struggles that they had and the solutions they were taking, and people were relating to it really well. Not like, you're up here, so whatever you say is like, it doesn't relate to me because you're special. But no, they've come from here, same level as you, and this is how I dealt with it. So that's valid also. And if that's where you're at, like you say, you don't want to be fake, but you don't want to let people down. But don't you think it's more of a letdown to be fake?
Yeah.
Especially when it's uncovered, and then you have to spend your whole life hiding it. Of course, as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, if for you it's a conflict, then the obvious solution is to evolve, so you can be the example that you would like to be. And I'm sure that'll happen eventually. I'm sure the conflict will push you there because you'll feel that need at some point. I would think.
Yeah. When in my best moments, that road is very clear.
Yeah. But yeah. My experience from doing workshops is that many devotees think that the problems they have are unique and other devotees are not dealing with those problems. Because you don't get that impression from hearing class. Like I give class, you get an impression like, basically I never had a problem in my life. I had everything figured out the day I joined, and Krishna consciousness is just blissfully ecstatic. And practically every devotee gives class, that's kind of the impression you get, isn't it? They're just like, this is the standard, and this is what we should do, and don't eat too much, and get up early, and chant without offense. So you're thinking, well, that's what he does, because he's telling you to do that. But in the workshops, when people open up and start talking about it, many devotees comment that they're relieved to find, not in a bad way, it sounds funny, but I'm relieved to find out that you all have the same problems I do, because I thought I was uniquely fallen. So I'm happy to find out that you're as fallen as me. that gives me some encouragement and I've seen this over and over again. So I think maybe we have to communicate that a little more. So it's okay. Maybe you're the one who has to communicate. You've been a devotee for so many years, but if you say, I have trouble, then all the people here are going to think, oh, I thought after 30, 35 years there'd be no trouble. And you go, no, there's trouble. If you're not careful, you'll have trouble. So that also becomes an example.
The Pandavas had troubles all the time. I mean, it's part of Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
It's just, hopefully...
Maya's always ready.
Yeah, and Krishna likes to test the devotees.
Yeah.
I mean, not only the pure devotees, also the beginners, because we always have the option. We are Tatastha Shakti, we can be enamored by Maya or by Krishna. So we will be, tempted. And that doesn't stop. But as we become more Krishna conscious or more willing to be Krishna conscious, the choices may become easier for Krishna. Choosing Krishna may become easier. And also sometimes he shows us that Maya is really not that nice. As you get older, you
should write a song called Maya's Really Not That Nice. That'd be a good one. Well, we have Nirmala, then you, and then you. So clockwise.
I just wanted to ask a bit more about the vulnerability part, which I think is really important. So initially I wanted to ask, how do you create a culture that people can be vulnerable, but then I'm thinking more, if I have to look at myself, because that's where it starts. I feel that we live in a society where people are quite snappy. They can easily attack or easily judge, and so somehow, if I want to be vulnerable, I have to have courage or feel safe and know that people might judge me, even though I want to be vulnerable. So I'm just thinking, like,
the fears that you have.
Yeah, like, so what would you tell a devotee who values being genuine and wants to be vulnerable, but is the environment? How should you look at that?
There's an easy solution, because any kind of change has to start from the top. And if the leaders are doing it, it becomes really easy for you to do it. And if they're not, then you have this problem. And I can tell you a story. This is a funny story. You like funny stories?
Yeah.
It's allowed on Monday night.
Especially on Monday night.
So, in 1970-71, Prabhupada was traveling in India. So he'd been in America basically since 65 with a little time in India. But now he had gone back to India in 70, so it was like a big thing. Prabhupada's not in America or Europe, he's in India. So one devotee decided he would send us periodically little printouts of nectar, things that Prabhupada said. So you'd get a photocopied paper in the mail and said, this is the latest what Prabhupada said, because there's no email. So a little quote, Prabhupada said this, that, he did this and that. So then one of the quotes was, and Prabhupada said, only to eat 1 cup of dal and 2 chapatis. So cups like 250 milliliters. That's what you should eat a day. So, that's what Prabhupada said, so that's what we did. Yeah. Breakfast, I think, in those days was yogurt, chickpeas, and fruit. And so then you're pretty hungry by lunch, and then 1 cup of dal, imagine. 2 chapatis and a cup of dal. That's almost like a snack. It's not really a meal. But we did that, and we didn't have dinner. You can imagine everybody was hungry. And I thought, well, this is what Prabhupada wants us to do, and I'm the leader, the temple president, so I can't let anybody know that this is hard, because we all have to do it, so I have to be the example, right? So we would distribute prasadam every day on Harinam. We'd make like cornbread or something. So what was happening, devotees were so hungry, they'd say, can I distribute the cornbread? And they'd go away from the Harinam party when nobody could see them, and they'd eat it, but I would see them eating it. So, and so everybody's looking at me thinking, okay, well, Mahatma's doing this, and he's setting the example, and he's not complaining. So if I'm hungry and complaining, there's something wrong with me. I'm just not Krishna conscious. And that was probably what was going on in people's minds. Then Krishna inspired me at one point to just tell everybody, I can't do this. This is like too hard. We're going to have to go back to regular diet. But nobody could say that because I had created like this pretentious thing that I'm, Mr. Tapasya. And I can do this because I'm Mahatma, the temple president. So once I did that, there was this like big sigh of relief. And everyone, it's like the vulnerability atmosphere it was just like the bubble was popped and everybody was just like, oh, I could be myself. So that's an example of the leader saying, I can't even do this. Or just like sometimes when I'm talking to devotees about Grihastha life, sometimes I'll refer to my Grihastha life and refer to the mistakes I made as a husband, because I've made many. And pretty much all the men I talk to are making the same mistakes that I made. So now I can instruct them because I've corrected myself. And I think they appreciate it because I've been through it, and I don't think they minimize because they know I have a good relation with my wife now, so I think they appreciate that I've corrected myself. So the fear of being vulnerable is not always justified, that people will react the way you think they react. What psychologists say is that people tend to get closer to vulnerable people than pretentious people, because vulnerable people are real, and people like people who are real. And you can't have close relationships with pretentious people. They actually like it. Now, in a work environment, that's another thing. But in a devotee environment or an environment in general with friends, people appreciate people who are honest. They just like you have better relationships when you're honest, when you're open, and people respect that because it's an aspect of humility, so it's highly respected. That's my experience. So if it comes from the leaders, you won't have such a difficult time. If it doesn't, and you're trying to do it, it doesn't work that way. Culture change always starts at the top. So you can't change a culture in an organization if the top doesn't change it. Because the bottom will get frustrated if the top doesn't change it. So that's where it starts.
It's still, like, maybe, if I may speak for Manjari, I'm not sure if she's in any positions within ISKCON, or for me, I don't have any position, but I still want to be honest and genuine and vulnerable. So, like, what's appropriate?
Do it. See what happens.
Why?
Just do it with the right people you trust.
I think that's, people don't trust enough each other.
Well, that's a good way to find out who you want to have for friends. I got married when I was 42, and I was actually going to take sannyas. And Krishna arranged that I don't take sannyas, I wasn't ready yet. So I went from sannyas-less saffron to married. And some people, when that happened, they wouldn't even talk to me. And I go, okay, now I know who's who. Because, your friends are like, yeah, whatever. Do what you have to do. And other people who like to judge you, they're just like, I was like a disease. So it was okay, because then I knew those weren't the people I was going to be close to. So I think it's the same thing. You want to see who loves you, put on saffron for a few weeks. Then put white on again and see what happens. Yes.
Yeah. How do you advise how to deal with when you have a problem with a devotee or devotees, or what's the best way to deal with it?
Okay.
Because it's also that it's not good for your to make offenses.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, the best way to deal with it is...
It's not the right question. I don't know how to answer it. Okay, yeah.
the best way to deal with it is not always the best way. Because you may approach somebody and you may respect them and follow protocol, but they may not appreciate it. And they may have a bad reaction. So you have to know who you're dealing with and what they expect of you. And so sometimes, let's say you have a problem with me, then you might go to Janakinath and say, I have this problem, what should I do? And he'll say, okay, I'll talk to Mahatma. So that might be the best way, because he'll tell you, well, if you tell him directly, he's going to do a puja to send you to the lower planets. Or he might say, no, you can talk to him. It'll be good if you talk to him directly. If I talk on your behalf, he won't like that. He would feel offended that you didn't trust him enough, that you could be honest with him. So it depends on the individual. Of course, there has to be respect. Now, one of the things that we can do when we have to present a problem, we can say, it's not what you're doing, it's me. I'm having trouble adapting to this. It's what I need. So that way you don't make the person feel that they're at fault, but
You have to keep it there then.
yeah, it's my issue. Like the other day you chastised me, and I'm a very sensitive person, and I deserve the chastisement. Certainly deserve what?
I didn't understand.
Chastised?
Yeah, okay.
Let's say I chastised you, and you were really upset. You almost left Krishna consciousness because of it. So it's pretty serious. And so how to tell me that? And maybe what I said was actually true, but it was so heavy, it didn't have a good effect on you. So you come to me and say, what you said was true, and I appreciate it, but I just want you to know I'm an extremely sensitive person, and the result of that, I was having a really hard time. So I appreciate your care and concern, and if ever you have to chastise me, it would be better for me, it would have a better effect if it could be done this way. So that's one way of doing it. My wife does that with me all the time. I appreciate that you're concerned about this, but when you say it that way, it doesn't inspire me. If you do it this way. So, but again, it depends on the person you're approaching, because some people, it's like, who are you? You're just a young devotee, and what do you know? I don't agree with you. Hopefully we don't have leaders like that, but until the world is perfect, we do have leaders like that. So you want to be respectful. And oftentimes it's easier to go through somebody else and discuss with them.
Yes.
Am I wrong? Is this the wrong attitude? Is there something I'm missing? Did they do anything wrong? Do I just see it? And maybe it's resolved that way. Sometimes people are the way they are, and there won't be a resolution. And you might just have to accept that our chemistry doesn't work. So he means well, but the way he does it, it just doesn't inspire me. And then we come to realize, well, that's just how he does it. It doesn't inspire a lot of people, but he's doing a lot of service. Krishna has given him this position, and this is what we're dealing with now. So I'm just going to have to adapt to it. So sometimes that's all you can do. A chance to be a little more tolerant. Or maybe it just means to have less interaction with him. This is true whether you're a devotee or not. It's just, of course we have some culture, but still, if a person's culture means senior people are respected. And we have to learn how to deal with it. Now, these Indian boys in their culture, if the senior is doing something that's causing them problems, they won't go and tell them this is not their culture. They'll just tolerate it. The only problem is if what the person is doing is damaging them or the family, and they're tolerating it. That's a problem. But generally, in their culture, they'll just tolerate it because that's the culture to respect it. But in Holland, that's not so much the culture. Maybe it was, but the culture is just like, I'm to tell you what you're doing wrong. So I think there's a balance. Both have a good and a bad side. Sometimes maybe their grandfather needs to know that he's causing a problem for their father or their sister or mother, and someone has to talk to him. But it's be the right person, the right time, in the right way. So it's subtle.
Speaking of the right time.
It's right time for Kirtan.
No, well, let's decide a little bit, because I know many people are tired and thirsty and hungry,
One
and
more question.
so I don't know.
2 more questions, and
Yeah,
then,
is that okay?
then we'll see where we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. He has one, and then you have one.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank
it's,
you.
It's a general answer. But
Yes, but devotees are also just normal people.
yeah,
I'd
exactly.
say. So
Devotees have the normal faults of the other normal
yes,
people.
and you
Exactly.
think that's what I thought, at least, that other devotees were perfect and they don't hurt you or whatever, but they do, because they're also just people.
Yeah, people there. We're trying to be devotees, so we're getting there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we do the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Prabhupada's point when someone was at fault. He said, "Well, we're not perfect. We're conditioned. We're trying to be."
Yeah.
So we have to see that. But there are many advanced devotees also that are very special. So everybody's similar. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I remember a couple of things that happened to me in the temple when I first came to the temple. I remember once someone told me something about just be tolerant, and it took me a couple of years to understand that. What they meant by tolerant, I couldn't understand it at that point. And I remember another time.
What did they mean?
Huh?
What did they mean by tolerant?
Well, there was someone that was a bit. He was in the kitchen and he was shouting or something, and he really went off at me.
Yeah.
It made me angry as well. So his negative reaction caused me to react negatively. And I spoke to someone about it, and she'd been a devotee a lot longer, and she said, "Oh, just be tolerant, just be tolerant."
Yeah.
So it took me a little bit of time to sort of like understand exactly what they meant. And then I remembered that there was another devotee in the temple. I just couldn't understand what was happening now and again. And then I went to Janakinath and asked some advice. And one of the things that he said to me was, "Can you name 5 good qualities of that person?" Because and that was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was some good advice.
You want to hear a funny story?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
We always want to hear funny stories.
Two devotees were fighting. So they came to the temple president. He did the same thing. He said, he asked him, "Tell me, before we resolve this, tell me something good." And the devotee couldn't come up with anything. He hated him so much. And that other devotee was like one of the best Mridanga. He was like an amazing Mridanga player. So I was like, "Well, tell us something good. Is there anything you can say?" He's a good Mridanga player. All you could get out of it. Unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah, I think I have abstractly the answer somewhere already.
Okay.
It was about I know like 2 hands full of devotees who are bodily my senior, but in devotional life not junior.
Oh, okay.
And it sometimes gives also some confusion.
Oh, yeah.
I think I know.
Well, according to Vaishnava etiquette, seniority is based on the day you were initiated. So if you're initiated today and he's initiated tomorrow, you're the senior devotee. One time, devotees were sitting in Prabhupada's room, so one was sitting in front of another. And the one behind him had been initiated before him. Prabhupada said, "You should not sit in front of him, he's your senior godbrother." It was by initiation date.
It is sometimes that this who is younger in devotional life doesn't take what you say very serious, because bodily you are so much younger.
Yeah.
But you're very experienced on the other hand. Maybe you just let it go and wait till this person just finds out for
We
himself.
Someday, Prabhus, you'll find out I'm more advanced than you.
No, not in that way. But you try to communicate and they can't hear it because they look down on you because you're so young. They find out later. It's not that you knew it, but they get the point.
Well, maybe they never will. You never know.
Isn't there also a difference between being senior or being advanced? That's not necessarily the same, isn't it?
But one of the things that we realize from what you're saying is that there's unlimited opportunity to be tolerant and humble. Because if you're not humble in that situation, you'll get frustrated and they'll get angry. And one of my mottos is the world isn't just. It's like things aren't always the way they're supposed to be. Like the people who should be doing something are not always the ones who do it. Sometimes the people who shouldn't do it end up doing it. And not every husband is really nice to his wife. Not every mother is great. So there's just so many opportunities to be tolerant. And just like what you're describing is like kind of an injustice. To someone junior is mistreating someone senior because they're older. So it's a kind of injustice. But you can switch it around also and say, well, he's older, so I respect older people. So you can go with that and practice some humility. So there's good opportunity in the material world, to practice humility, tolerance, patience, forgiveness. It's all around us, isn't it? That's what I've learned, because when you're talking about having been in ISKCON for a long time, experienced many of those situations. It's like it's not just, it's not right.
Yeah, sometimes you see something coming because you've seen it so many times before, and then you want to warn this poor person. It will all go wrong when you continue what you're doing now.
And sometimes you can't.
Yeah, sometimes you just can't tell it.
That's called,
You don't want to see somebody else suffering, so you want to prevent it. But it doesn't always work. The other person also has to learn.
That's the essence of parenting. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, we don't have any children. So we're not that blessed.
Well,
but
Chanaka Pandit said from the age of 5 to 16 you discipline them, but after 16 you're just their friend.
And maybe discipline will work against after that age.
It does all the time. I see it. Indian families have raged the age of 16 to 49. They've raged the age of he says at 16 treat them like friends, no longer like son and brother. I said a lot of Indian families raise the age from 16 to 49. So he's 49 and he's still being treated like he's 16. And they don't like it. It doesn't work. And some of them are very unhappy, and it turns them against their family sometimes. They just want to leave and get away from it. That's unfortunate. Am I right? Yeah, it's quite common. Okay, so what do we do now? We chant Mahaprasadi Govindaya or we chant Hare Krishna? Mahaprasadi Govindaya. Okay, we'll chant Mahaprasadi Govindaya, and if we're still alive afterwards, we can decide if we do more Kirtan. Or is it too late? We wake the neighbors?
No, I'm fine. I like it. Some people are getting pretty dry.
Mahaprasadi Govindaya.
Mahaprasadi Govindaya.
Namo Brahmani Vaishnave.
Namo Brahmani Vaishnave.
Svapapunyavato Raja.
Svapapunyavato Raja.
Vishvaso Navajayate.
Vishvaso Navajayate.
Sarira Abhijjaja.
Sarira Abhijjaja.
Indriya Taika.
Indriya Taika.
Vibale Vishaya Shagore.
Vibale Vishaya Shagore.
Dharmaji Jivati.
Dharmaji Jivati.
Lobamoy Sudurmati.
Lobamoy Sudurmati.
Vijita Katina Samsare.
Vikata Katina Samsare.
Krishna Boradoyamoy.
Krishna Boradoyamoy.
Hori Bora Jiva Joy.
Hori Bora Jiva Joy.
Swaprasad Hanadilobai.
Swaprasad Hanadilobai.
Say Anamrita Pao.
Say Anamrita Pao.
Radha Krishna Gunagao.
Radha Krishna Gunagao.
Prema Deko Chaitananitai.
Prema Deko Chaitananitai.
Mahaprasad ki
Jai.
That's Bengali, performed by a wannabe Bengali.
Ja, van Grace Mahatma Prabhu.